Hi, and welcome to the Studebaker Road Church of Christ weekly sermon. Today we're going to be looking at the topic of depression and the Bible. There's a lot of questions surrounding this, and this is not going to be an all-encompassing lesson, but hopefully one that will stimulate you or you and your loved ones to have these conversations that are found in the Bible. Oftentimes, these are topics that we shy away from or we try to avoid, but they are in fact biblical topics that need discussion. When you think about depression, I want you to start by thinking about your own personal reaction, your own personal emotions. If you know me or if you've spent any time with me, I'm often a person that has a smile on my face. I'm a person that enjoys the happy moments of life. I like to have joyful things happen, but sometimes my face can just be a put on. If I've had a tiff with my wife on the way to services, then sometimes my face of smiling and happy-go-lucky is one that I've put on. Sometimes I've gotten up to preach a lesson and my heart has just been broken, or it's been weighing heavy because of something that's happened earlier in the week, and I put on a face that I'm forced to show others around me. But sometimes I can be in a dark place. Things that affect me personally, things that I've had to put a face on are when someone that I've loved or I've cared about has left the faith, or someone that I love and I care about has really had a struggling week in their faith. There have been problems in my own personal family at times, and that brings about a lot of real sadness in my life. That brings about this feeling of being in despair, and I know it's something that many of you can relate to as well. You put on this face, but underneath you're hurting, you're broken, you're lost, you're in despair. And that's really the approach we're going to take to this discussion of depression. You're not ever going to find the word depression in the Bible, but you will find this concept or this idea of someone who is in this pit of despair, or the phrase, I am like someone who goes down into the pit. Now, a very popular song for many is this song called It Is Well With My Soul. And there's a few lines in there that we're going to look at, but if you know the concept, or if you just listen to the title of the song, you can guess that the concept is, no matter what happens in this life, I can confidently say to God, it is well with my soul. Well, that's written by this man named Horatio Spafford, and Spafford was an attorney that lived in the 1800s, and he had invested his wealth into real estate. In 1871, there was this great fire in Chicago that burned down everyone's real estate in this particular area, and Horatio lost his entire wealth. 2 years later, he decided that he, his wife, and his 4 daughters were going to go vacation towards England. And on November 22nd, 1873, while they were crossing the Atlantic, this Ville de Havre ship was sunk. It struck an iron sailing vessel, and it killed 226 people, including all of Spafford's daughters. His wife Anna survived, and when she got to England, she simply sent the telegram to her husband, saved alone. Now, the account goes on to say that Horatio then sailed to meet his wife. And upon this sailing vessel, the captain stopped in the area where the ship had sunk to show him where he had lost his children. And it is in that he writes this hymn, It Is Well With My Soul. One of the lines in the song is, when peace like a river attendeth or attends my way. Have you ever been in that moment of life where everything just seems to go right? Where your life is going really well, where peace is like a river, it's just flowing, you have a good marriage, you have a great job, things are going just really well. And then the next line, when sorrows like sea billows roll. Can you imagine what Horatio was feeling when he penned those words? One thing I failed to mention is that same year where he lost his entire wealth in the Chicago fires, he also lost his little boy, his son, contracted scarlet fever. Later on in the hymn, it goes on to say, "Whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul." I feel like for many of us, that song strikes a chord right here, right now. Many of us, before the events of COVID-19, were perhaps in a place where we could say peace flowed like a river. Our jobs were secure. Our health was secure. Many of us were enjoying a time of maybe even prosperity, looking forward to the year to come with excitement and enthusiasm. But as the year has progressed, it seems like things have gone from bad to worse. We've been on the cusp of World War III. Many have lost their jobs. Many have died due to this sickness. Sorrows like sea billows roll. I remember just a few weeks before this whole thing started happening, just being heartbroken because even one of our members had recently passed away. And maybe you're still dealing with some of those things. Maybe you're dealing just with the loss of certain freedoms. And that to you right now equates to sea billows of sorrow rolling over you. And that's the hardest thing to admit, right? That things in life aren't perfect. That things in life aren't as maybe even we desire for them to be. It's hard to admit that, but it has to be said. What does this world offer? Well, as many of us have come to realize, this world doesn't offer a whole lot. The world can offer a very hopeless and a very bleak situation. Jesus said to his disciples in John 14, on the night he died, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you, not as the world gives to you." Jesus understood this concept that the world can't really give you peace. The world can't give you security. The world can't give you hope. And so what is Jesus doing for his disciples as he knows that he's about to depart from this world, as he's about to leave his disciples, as he knows that his disciples are going to be scattered like sheep because the shepherd has been struck down? He says, I want to impart with you peace. Not like the one that you understand, but a peace that you haven't experienced yet, a peace that comes from the Lord, a peace that comes from knowing me. He goes on to say in the rest of verse 27, "Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid." Oftentimes, many people find themselves with deep despair and deep sadness and hopelessness and depression simply because they're afraid. They don't know what to do or they don't know what to expect next. And Jesus said, I've come here to give you a peace that surpasses understanding. John 16. In just a few hours, he's going to be sweating drops of blood. And he's asking God to let this cup pass from him. But he says, I want to give you peace. And in John 16 and verse 33, "These things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation." And we'd understand that. We get that lesson. There's a lot of tribulation going on in our lives right here, right now. Some of you way worse than I could ever imagine or experience. And so what does Jesus counsel to you? But you, be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. Yet as I think about this concept of depression and how it's seen and found in the Bible, I want you to contemplate this man in Psalm 88. This man in Psalm 88. This is written by this man named Heman. And just notice some of the verses that are found here. Verse 4 of Psalm 88. "I am counted with those who go down to the pit." There's the idea of depression. I am counted with those who are depressed. I am like a man who has no strength, adrift among the dead, like the slain who lie in the grave. Verse 6, "You have laid me in the lowest pit, in darkness, in the depths." Verse 8, "You have put away my acquaintances far from me." I'm alone. I have no one, God. Where are all my friends? Where are my family? You have made me an abomination to them. I am shut up and I cannot get out. There's that idea of hopelessness. He feels like he's in the rock bottom and he has no way of getting out. He's just looking up and he feels alone and lost. I have been afflicted and ready to die from my youth. I suffer your terrors. I am distraught. Your burning anger has passed over me. Your terrors have destroyed me. They have surrounded me like water all day long. They have encompassed me altogether. Have you ever found yourself in a situation, maybe at the ocean or at a pool, where you just feel like you're gasping for air? Like you can't get a breath? That's what he feels like. Verse 18 of Psalm 88, you have removed lover and friend far from me. My acquaintances are in the darkness. Man, what a great psalm, right? What a happy-go-lucky psalm. This man is crying out to God. He's in complete despair. He feels down in the pit. He is depressed. And what God is saying is, it's okay to be discouraged. It's okay to be down. Can you imagine a time that you've cried out to God in despair and in hopelessness, and that being recorded for all of eternity? That's what we have here in Psalm 88. Is this man crying out to God and God saying, it's okay. It's okay to feel like that. And I want to state at this point in the lesson, depression is not a sin. Depression is not a sin. There are many psalms that we could look to where someone is crying out to God and asking God, God, where are you? Where are you? Where are you? Depression simply means to be pressed down. It means to be down or to press under. And we can understand this. Oftentimes when we say the word depression, we think of clinical or some kind of emotional or mental depression. But there are tropical depressions, a low pressure in the atmosphere, an economic depression as one experienced in the 1930s, or many of us recently in the early 2000s. There's a geographic depression, an area on the surface of the earth, or on the moon where parts of the earth are lower than other spots. To be depressed simply means to be pressed down. It is to have this thought and this feeling like you can't get out, like you're completely overwhelmed. And we live in a society, in a day and age where people are lonelier than ever, even with all the connections we have to social media, even with all the likes and the followers and the friends that we can have at our disposal, even with the ability to be in contact with anyone at any time and anywhere. I can't help but think of the song, Look at All the Lonely People. Just thousands of 900 numbers, people looking for help, looking for someone to talk to, just so that they might listen to them. Happy hours have gone crazy, just bars and restaurants full of lonely people looking for some way to feel happy, to escape, to forget. Alcohol sales have gone through the roof. Why? Because there are lonely people everywhere. Dating services are booming because people want to find love and they want to find their soulmate somewhere out there. I know I can find them. But depression goes beyond just mere loneliness. It's not just a sign of someone feeling alone and lost. This is interesting. In a recent study, as early as 2018. These are facts about depression. Depression occurs twice as often in females than in males. Depression occurs more often in higher socioeconomic groups. Depression occurs more often in the 4th and 5th decades, in the 40s and 50s of someone's life. It is what someone feels when they contemplate their retirement account. It's what someone feels after they return back to school or work from coming from a vacation. It can be a letdown after a huge high in their life. It's what comes after we've been sick for several days or several weeks. It's the feeling we get after we have an intense argument with our spouse or a loved one. It's part of the grieving process of losing a loved one. And it happens when anger is turned inward. Sometimes depression is just when you're mad at yourself. And how many of us have seen that cycle just spiral out of control in someone's lives? They know they ought not to feel this way. And they become angry with themselves for feeling these emotions. Is depression real? Health Magazine recorded depression is more common than AIDS, cancer, and diabetes combined. Nearly 400,000 people attempt suicide in the United States every single year. Let that number sink in. 400,000 people attempt suicide every year in the United States. And yet, you know how we often try to help someone in their depression? We say all the wrong things. Sometimes out of the goodness or kindness or love or frustration that we might have with someone we care about who's in depression, we want to do good, but we often end up causing more harm. Sometimes that's just out of our own ignorance. But you know what someone who's depressed doesn't want to hear? What you have isn't true depression. You're just kind of down right now. It's all in your head. You just need to get over it. You need to forget about this and move on. Snap out of it. Hey, you know what? Time heals all wounds. And it's time that you grab yourself by the bootstraps and move on. If it were me, I would, and then we fill in the blank with our own solution to the problem. Or we say, and perhaps this is one of the worst things to say to our fellow brethren, you know what? You just don't have enough faith. Depression is an emotion. Depression is a mental state. But understand, depression is not a sin. Depression is not a sin. It is biblical. Depression is this emotional superglue where someone just feels completely lost and hopeless, or they feel like their situation isn't going to improve, or where they feel like no one is going to be able to help them get out of it. And the worst thing you can do to someone is take away their hope. If you want to break someone, take away any ounce of hope that they have. That's what these individuals feel. Depression, as we've looked already in the biblical accounts, and as the psalmist Heman expresses in Psalm 88, you just feel trapped. Like you're at rock bottom looking up. Like you don't know how to escape this pit that you're in, this pit of despair. Or maybe you didn't start so far down, but you've just spiraled downward. You feel stuck. You feel like you can't shake it loose. You feel like you can't get out of your situation. And a common question is, aren't God's people, aren't God's beloved, aren't God's children, aren't Christians exempt from depression? If you have faith and a belief in God, if you know God and you know who He is in your life, shouldn't you never have a moment of depression? Can a good Christian really ever have depression? What I want to remind us of today is that individuals all throughout the Bible dealt with depression. And so I just want to look at some causes. And again, this isn't an exhaustive list, but some causes of depression as seen in the Bible. Sometimes depression is self-induced by personal action and personal choices. We see that in David's character. David, when he was dealing with the sin of Bathsheba, for over a year he was dealing with that situation. And he's quoted as saying, "My bones felt like they were dried up." He felt that way because of his own sin and his own choices and his own decision. And many times, people feel depressed because of some kind of guilt they have in their lives, some kind of unresolved issue. And this is not just like the Freudian things that happen in your childhood. Sometimes they are more recent things that happen in your adulthood. Guilt is a huge cause of depression, whether it is self-induced or externally induced. And that leads us to the second point. Sometimes depression is due to the actions of another. But more importantly, it's due to the actions of a close friend or someone in your family. Psalm 55, verses 1 through 15. David says that he was brought down. Why was he brought down? Because Ahithophel betrayed him. Ahithophel, one of his close friends, left him to go then support and join himself to Absalom, who was creating a rebellion against David. Sometimes depression isn't caused by your own emotions or your own mental state of being. It's caused by the actions of others. And as many intelligent people, and as a lot of modern scientists are saying, depression can just be a genetic disorder or something that comes along with other medical issues. And this is something that many of us can relate to and understand. Things that you are predisposed to because of your family's history or state of being. But I want to remind you here that if you are depressed and you are a Christian, man, you're not alone. And perhaps the most famous example of this that I could think of, or the example that everyone could relate to, is that of Job. In Job chapter 3, he says in verses 3 through 5, "May the day perish in which I was born, and the night in which it was said, a male child is conceived. May that day be darkness. May God above not seek it, nor the light shine upon it. May darkness and the shadow of death claim it. May a cloud settle on it. May the blackness of the day terrify it." Verse 11, "Why did I not die at birth? Why did I not perish when I came from the womb?" Job. Man, I'm sure he relates a lot to Horatio, right? He lost everything. He lost his wealth. He lost his children. Even his own wife told him to curse God and die. You don't think that he felt despaired? Like he was in this pit of darkness? You don't think he felt and understood what it meant to feel pressed down by God? And again, I thought good Christians were exempt from depression. I thought Christians should never be depressed if they truly know God. What did God say of Job in the very first chapter? What led all this to happen? "Have you considered my servant Job, whom there is none like him in all the earth? Do whatever you want to him, Satan. Do whatever you want." And eventually, he would even permit Satan to strike his own flesh. And he said, "His heart belongs to me." David is another popular figure that we can relate to and we can understand. And we've already covered a little bit of Psalm 32, this feeling of despair that David felt because of his own sin. But Psalm 55 records this in verses 4 through 7. "My heart is severely pained within me, and the terrors of death have fallen upon me. Fearfulness and trembling have come upon me, and horror has overwhelmed me. So I said, oh, that I had wings like a dove. I would fly away and be at rest. Indeed, I would wander far off and remain in the wilderness." Again, this feeling, God, lift me up, bring me through this, have healing in these wings so that I might overcome this hopelessness, this despair, this sadness that I feel. And one more person for your consideration, Jeremiah. Jeremiah is famously known as the weeping prophet. Even the other book that is penned by him is Lamentations. And again, the reason I chose Jeremiah is to get the concept away from our minds that if you are somehow depressed, if you find yourself in this pit of despair, if you find yourself overwhelmed with sadness, that therefore your faith must be in question. Man, Jeremiah was a guy who was only doing the will of the Lord. Throughout the book of Jeremiah, you find God speaking to Jeremiah and Jeremiah speaking the words of God. As the Lord has said, I will say. The Lord put in my mouth his words, and I spoke them. And what happened to Jeremiah, someone who went around preaching and teaching the will and the word of God? What happened to Jeremiah, someone who was actively seeking the good for his fellow countrymen? What happened to Jeremiah, who lamented at the thought that his people, his brothers and sisters, would perish? He was thrown into a literal pit. And he was left there and forgotten until finally someone remembered Jeremiah and brought him up out of the pit. But Jeremiah 20 verses 14 through 15. Cursed be the day in which I was born. Let the day not be blessed in which my mother bore me. Let the man be cursed who brought news to my father, saying, a male child has been born to you, making him very glad. Verse 18 of Jeremiah 20. Why did I come from the womb to see labor and sorrow, that my days should be consumed with shame? Are faithful Christians, are good Christians exempt from depression? No, because at the end of the day, we all live in a cursed and a broken world. We live in a world full of discouragement and doubt and depression. I want to conclude this lesson, and I appreciate you staying with me so far because I understand that this has been a little bit of a longer lesson. But we're going to conclude by reading Psalm 42 in its entirety. It's just 11 verses. Psalm 42. And this is what I ask of you. I want you to stay with this man. Not necessarily with me who is reading this, but put yourself in the mindset of this man who has penned this psalm and listen to the words that he has to say. Psalm 42. As the deer pants for the water brook, so my soul pants for you, O God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. When shall I come and appear before God? My tears have been my food day and night, while they say to me all day long, where is your God? These things I remember, and I pour out my soul within me. For I used to go along with the throng and lead them in procession to the house of God, with the voice of joy and thanksgiving, a multitude keeping festival. Why are you in despair, O my soul? And why have you become disturbed within me? Hope in God, for I shall again praise him for the help of his presence. O my God, my soul is in despair within me. Therefore remember you from the land of Jordan and the peaks of Hermon and from Mount Mizar. Deep calls to the deep, and the sounds of your waterfalls. All your breakers and your waves have rolled over me. The Lord will command his loving kindness in the daytime, and his songs will be with me in the night, a prayer to the God of my life. I will say to God, my rock, why have you forgotten me? Why do I go mourning because of the oppression of my enemy? As a scattering of my bones, my adversaries revile me, where they say to me all day long, where is your God? Why are you in despair, O my soul, and why have you become disturbed within me? Hope in God, for I shall yet praise him, the help of my countenance and my God. Just want to quickly break down this psalm. In the first two verses, maybe this sounds familiar. As a deer pants for the water. This is someone who thirsts for God. Other translations say, when shall I come and behold the face of God? When do I enter and see the face of God? When may I come and see the face of God? I want to be with God. I'm so lost in despair that I just wish I could go get a refreshing drink from God's presence. When will that happen? Where are you, God? God, are you hearing me? I'm crying out to you. Verses 3 and 4. What does the psalmist remember? He remembers the times where these groups of people could gather together to worship God. Man, how many of us can relate to that, right? I just want to be with my brothers and my sisters in a building, giving hugs, worshiping and praising God together, hearing their voices. Man, at this point, I'm sure many of the members of Studebaker Road would love to even hear my out-of-tune singing. Reminds me of what the Hebrew author says in chapter 10, verse 23 through 25. Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how to stimulate one another to love and good works, not forsaking the assembly of ourselves together, as is the habit of some, but exhorting or admonishing, encouraging one another, and so much the more as you see the day drawing near. And don't you long for that day to be together with God's people as this psalmist longs to be together with God's people? Verse 5. This is one of the most interesting parts of the psalm to me. Have you realized that most of the unhappiness in our own lives is due to the fact that we are listening to ourselves rather than talking to ourselves? Again, let me say that again. Most of the unhappiness and the sadness in our lives is because we are too busy listening to ourselves rather than talking to ourselves. Listen to what he says. Why are you cast down, O my soul? He's reminding himself, this is what you need to remember. This is what you need to know. Quit listening to yourself. Quit listening to your doubts. Quit listening to your despairs. Start talking to yourself with the language of God. Romans 8, verses 31 through 39. Philippians 4, verses 4 through 5. Find reasons to rejoice in God. Remind yourself of the good that God has done in your life. And if it's hard for you to picture the good that God has done in your life, remind yourself of the fact that you were once lost. And now God has saved you and redeemed you in baptism through the work of Jesus Christ. Talk to yourself. Don't listen to yourself. Verse 6. He remembers his past blessings. He mentions the Jordan. And when I think of the Jordan, I think of people coming and being baptized. Do you remember the day of your baptism? Man, I remember being 14 years old. I remember just feeling so lost after school. I remember calling up one of my friends and sitting down and I studied with him for hours, until I couldn't take it anymore and I wanted to be baptized that same day. He mentions here the height of Mount Hermon. One of my daughter's favorite songs to sing is the mountain song. Oh Lord, I need a mountain to climb on. Can you think of the mountaintop experiences that you've had with God? Those times in your life or in the lives of others that you were just on the highest high because of what God did in your life or in their life. How it was just unfathomable. That's what you will need to look for. That's what you need to remind yourself of. The heights of Mount Hermon. Or the Hill Miser. The Hill Miser was about as high as maybe an overpass. So not quite the highest high, but again, a good time. A time where you could remember, hey, things were good. Things were better because of what God had done. Remind yourself of these things to help get you through this. This is God's counsel to those that feel lost and wondering where he is. The psalmist then goes on in verses 7 through 8 to affirm God's sovereignty. He talks about being swallowed up by the water. It's like a cascading waterfall. It's like waves and billows rolling over me. It seems like I'm just gasping for air, God. And when God brings those waves or he allows those billows in your life, remind yourself of God's loving kindness. The songs in the night, God's answer to my prayers. Also found in verse 8, he sings these songs that he can pray to God, these songs in the night. There are some songs that we have in our lives as well that remind us of these things. They're not happy songs, but they're songs in which we plead with the Lord. Songs like Son of My Soul, Night with Ebon Pinion, Take My Hand, Precious Lord. And then he concludes in verses 9 through 11 with asking, why? When it looks like and it feels like God has forgotten him. Going back to verse 8, he knows he hasn't. And he's just saying words for the wind. Words that he knows that he just needs to express and get out. Job in verse 6 and verse 26, do you intend to rebuke my words and the speeches of a desperate man, which are as the wind? So again, to remind us of the hymn that inspired this lesson, it is well with my soul, when peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll. Whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. Do you believe that? Is there any way that we can help remind you of those things? If you need help in getting to a place where you can say to God, no matter what happens in this life, I will say, it is well with my soul, then let us know how we can help you. If you desire studies, if you desire the prayers of the congregation here, if we can get you right with the Lord tonight, if we can study with you to help show you what God's plan of redemption is, we want to do that. Let us know how we can help you. Thank you for joining us today.